Hi, in today's video, we're going to look at the redemptive role of Israel in the salvation of mankind. What many Gentile believers may not know is that Israel actually plays an important, crucial, and irreplaceable role in the very salvation plan that God has for all of humanity. For example, did you know that if Israel does not cry out for Yeshua, her Messiah, to return, Jesus will not return? We will address this in the next video when we talk about her role at the end of the age. But for this video, we're going to look at how she has been the very vehicle and vessel of salvation for all of humanity, even throughout the Old Testament until the first coming of Christ. So many of us may be wondering, why is it that Israel has such an important role? Well, the first reason is because God is always looking for vessels to advance His kingdom here on earth. It goes back all the way to Genesis, the very dominion mandate that the Lord gave to man. At first, He wanted to partner Adam and Eve. He wanted them to work with Him to be fruitful and multiply, and even advance the glory of God and the dominion of the Lord, even all across the earth. So after the fall, that hasn't changed. However, we must also see that the reason she has such an important role is also purely because of the sovereign divine election of God Himself. It is not because Israel is special that the Lord chose her to be the vessel, but it's because God chose her to be the vessel that she is special. So because of these two reasons, she actually plays this significant and irreplaceable role. So to try to see this from a big picture perspective, let's go back to Genesis 3:15 to see what actually happened after the fall. The Lord in His mercy put into action His very plan of redemption, and in Genesis 3:15 He actually prophesied to the serpent, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So even in Genesis 3:15, we see the Lord already making that very prophecy that one day there will come a seed of a woman, the Messiah, who will actually reverse the fall and also destroy the works of the enemy. And the thing is that the Lord chose not to cause Jesus to appear suddenly as a grown human being to save us, but He decided that Jesus should come even as a baby born of a woman. So in order for this prophecy to be fulfilled, God had to choose a lineage, a human lineage, a family through which Jesus the Messiah can be born. So we know the story. The Lord called out Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans. Actually, the word Jew is not a race, but it actually means called out one. So the Lord started even with Abraham. And then after Abraham, we know the story again. He chose Isaac, and then He chose Jacob. And out of the 12 tribes of Israel, Judah was the line through which the Messiah would come. And after that, it would have been the descendant of King David, where the Lord promised David that his descendant would sit on the throne of Jerusalem forever. For us as Gentiles, this is probably the most obvious way that Israel is that very vehicle of salvation. Because for us, very clearly, our salvation is by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. This is why the Jewish people kept so many records of genealogy, in Numbers, in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. It's not because they had nothing better to do, but it's because they were looking out for their Messiah. They knew from prophecy which line the Messiah would come. So they would write these down painstakingly so that when He comes, they would hopefully recognize Him. And it's the same reason why in the Gospels, especially in Matthew and in Luke, we see the genealogy of Jesus. It's because the writers wanted to prove that, hey, this is the prophesied Messiah that is to come. This is the anointed and holy one that was prophesied even in the Old Testament scriptures. Many of us might ask the question, could God have chosen another lineage, maybe the Chinese or the Caucasian? Well, He could have, but again, He is sovereign, and He can choose whomever He desires to birth forth the Messiah. And in this case, He chose the line of Abraham, then Isaac and Jacob, and then Judah, and then David. So if we look back in the Old Testament, we can see that Israel has also always been God's vehicle of salvation and redemption. Jesus Himself said, salvation is of the Jewish people, is of the Jews. In fact, Romans chapter 9, verses 4 and 5 talks about the entrustments that the Lord has given to the nation of Israel because she is his chosen vessel of salvation. In fact, Israel as a nation, with the entrustments that were given to her, is meant to be a witness of who God is, from the way that they worship to their moral laws, to their civil laws, their very constitution as a nation. They're actually meant to represent and express the true God of heaven and earth, and that is one of her roles even as a very chosen vessel. So with individuals in the Old Testament, we see that salvation comes to them when they believe in the God of Israel, whose name is Yahweh. Two notable examples are Ruth, when she told Naomi that, your God will be my God and your people will be my people. And the other is Naaman from 2 Kings 5, where he was actually the commander of the Syrian army, and he decided that he was not going to worship any other gods except the God of Israel, and because of that, salvation also came to him as an individual. As a nation, the Lord also used Israel as that vehicle of redemption. For example, when Joshua was commanded to conquer the promised land, the reason that the Lord told them to do so was because the land had been defiled by the wickedness even of the nations that were inhabiting them and the sacrifices that they made. For example, they sacrificed even their children to their various gods. So the land was already very defiled, and the Lord used the nation of Israel as a very vehicle of redemption to cleanse the land and to even remove wickedness even from the very land of Canaan. So if we go to Romans 9 verses 4 and 5, let's see what the Lord actually gave to Israel, being that very vessel of salvation. Verse 4 says, "Who are Israelites, to whom pertain the adoption," which means that calling out, like he called out Abraham. And then Israel is actually his very firstborn when the Lord delivered her out of Egypt. The glory, they saw the real and true glory of God at Mount Sinai, and how he actually led them, cloud by day and fire by night. The covenants, we'll come back to this because it really pertains to even that new covenant. The giving of the law, the service of God, which is that worship, the tabernacle, the sacrifices and the feast, the promises, which really will be fulfilled especially at the end of the age, and we will talk about that in the next video. Of whom are the fathers, the patriarchs, and from whom, according to the flesh, Christ came. Again, that very lineage. So what many of us don't realize when it comes to the covenants is that the new covenant was actually made with the nation of Israel and not with the Gentile church. The Lord actually prophesied about this in Jeremiah 31:31. Jeremiah 31:31 actually says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." So he was really referring to the very new covenant. And even Jesus himself said that he came to the house of Israel and not for the Gentiles. However, we're not saying that salvation is not for the Gentiles, because in God's sovereign plan, he orchestrated it such that the gospel would actually eventually go to the Gentiles, and Gentiles would be grafted in to the very Jewish root that is Israel. Paul says this very clearly in Romans 11, where he says that Gentiles are actually grafted in, and also the Lord raised Paul up specifically as an apostle to the Gentiles. So even with the new covenant, we see that Israel is a very vehicle of salvation for us Gentiles to be saved. So that covers our spiritual salvation. Then what about, the physical salvation? What about God's kingdom coming onto earth literally as it is in heaven? For that, we're going to talk about Israel's role at the end of the age, because God is not yet done with her as his very vehicle of salvation. So we will talk more about that in the next video. God bless.